Don't say anything, Hyunjin, Felix whispered, his voice trembling as rain poured around them. Just listen to me this once. Storm swallowed the city in darkness. Cold wind rushed through the empty rooftop, carrying the scent of wet concrete and distant traffic. Thunder rolled across the sky like a warning. Hyunjin stood frozen. Rain dripped from his dark hair, sliding down his jaw, but he barely noticed. His attention remained fixed on Felix, who stood only a few steps away. Something was wrong, very wrong. Felix was smiling, not his usual bright smile. This one looked fragile, almost painful. Why are you looking at me like that? Hyunjin finally asked. Felix lowered his eyes. For several seconds, neither of them moved. The silence felt heavier than the storm. Then Felix laughed softly. You know what I realized today? Hyunjin frowned. What? That I spent years pretending I wasn't afraid. The words sounded strange coming from Felix. Fear was never a word people associated with him. To everyone else, Felix was sunlight, warm, gentle, strong, the person who always knew how to make others smile. But Hyunjin knew better. He knew the small habits Felix never noticed. The way he tapped his fingers when nervous. The way he looked away whenever conversations became too personal. The way he smiled a little too brightly whenever he was hurting. Hyunjin had noticed all of it. Yet somehow, he still felt unprepared for this moment. Afraid of what? He asked quietly. Felix looked up, their eyes met, and suddenly Hyunjin felt something tighten inside his chest. Losing people. Answer came immediately, as if Felix had been carrying it for years. Thunder cracked overhead. Felix stepped closer. Been scared for a long time. Hyunjin stared at him. The rain continued falling between them. I don't understand, smiled sadly. I know. His voice was barely louder than the wind, because I never told you. A strange feeling settled over Hyunjin, unease, confusion, worry. Every instinct told him this conversation was heading somewhere dangerous. Not dangerous in a physical sense, dangerous emotionally, the kind of conversation capable of changing everything. Felix, do you remember 5 years ago? The question interrupted him. Hyunjin blinked. Of course I do. Much. The memories returned immediately. Long practice nights, exhaustion, dreams that felt impossible, arguments, failures, victories. Moments when both of them wondered if they were strong enough to continue. Hyunjin nodded slowly. I remember, smiled. Back then, whenever things got difficult, I made myself a promise. Hyunjin waited. The rain seemed quieter now, as if even the storm wanted to hear the answer. What promise? Felix inhaled deeply. His hands shook slightly. For the first time, Hyunjin realized how nervous he truly was. Then Felix spoke. If I ever became successful, he stopped. His voice cracked. Hyunjin felt his heartbeat quicken. Felix swallowed hard. If I ever reached my dream, I promised myself I would never leave behind the people who helped me get there. The words hit harder than expected. Hyunjin looked away. Something warm and painful spread through his chest, because he knew exactly what Felix meant. There had been countless moments when everything almost fell apart. Moments nobody else knew, moments hidden behind cameras and smiles. Back then they had leaned on each other more than anyone realized, not because they were perfect, but because they understood the loneliness, the pressure, the fear of failure, the uncertainty. Felix took another step forward. Everyone changes eventually. Hyunjin remained silent. People grow apart. The rain ran down Felix's face. I know that's normal. His smile trembled. But every time I think about losing the people I care about, his voice became smaller. I get scared. For a second, Hyunjin forgot how to breathe, because this wasn't just a conversation. This was a confession, not romantic, not dramatic, something deeper, the confession of a fear someone had hidden for years. And suddenly Hyunjin understood. Felix wasn't afraid of failure. He wasn't afraid of criticism. He wasn't afraid of hard work. He was afraid of being left behind, afraid of watching important people slowly disappear from his life, afraid of becoming a stranger to those who once mattered most. The realization hurt, because Hyunjin understood that fear too, more than he wanted to admit. You idiot, Hyunjin muttered. Felix blinked. What, you carried all that by yourself? A surprised laugh escaped Felix. Maybe, Hyunjin shook his head. You really are impossible. The tension eased slightly. For the first time that night, Felix's smile looked genuine, but only for a moment. Then his expression became serious again. There's something else. Hyunjin's stomach tightened. What is it? Felix looked directly into his eyes. No hesitation, no masks, no pretending, just honesty. And then he said the words that would remain in Hyunjin's memory forever. I made another promise. Wind howled around them. Hyunjin waited. Felix smiled softly. The day I became afraid that someone important might drift away, voice steadied. I promised I would tell them before it was too late. The world suddenly felt silent. Even the rain seemed distant. Hyunjin stared at him, unable to speak, because he understood exactly who Felix was talking about. Not a group, not everyone, him, only him. Years of shared memories flashed through his mind. Late-night conversations, laughter, arguments, silent support during difficult days, moments neither of them had ever properly acknowledged. Felix wasn't asking for anything, wasn't demanding reassurance, wasn't trying to hold him back. He was simply being honest, and somehow that honesty felt overwhelming. For several seconds, Hyunjin couldn't find any words. His chest felt tight, his throat felt dry. The storm continued around them, but everything else faded away. Only Felix remained, waiting, not expecting an answer, just hoping to be understood. Hyunjin looked at the city lights glowing beneath the rain. Then he looked back at Felix. For years they had spoken thousands of words to each other. Yet this moment felt different, more important, more real. Finally, Hyunjin laughed softly. A laugh mixed with emotion he couldn't explain. You really know how to make things difficult. Laughed too, sorry. No, Hyunjin shook his head, don't apologize. His voice became quiet. I'm glad you told me. Relief on Felix's face appeared instantly, and seeing it made Hyunjin realize how long Felix had been carrying this burden. Too long, far too long. The rain slowly began to weaken. Clouds drifted across the night sky. The city lights reflected in countless puddles around them. For the first time that evening, neither of them felt the need to speak. The silence no longer felt heavy, it felt comfortable, safe. Like returning home after a long journey, Felix leaned against the rooftop railing. You know something? What? I feel lighter. Hyunjin smiled. Good. Laughed. You're surprisingly nice today. Don't get used to it. I'll try. The two of them stood there together as the storm gradually passed. Neither realized how important this night would become, how years later they would still remember it, not because of the rain, not because of the rooftop, not because of the promise itself, but because it was the first time they allowed themselves to be completely honest. And sometimes honesty changes a relationship more than any grand gesture ever could. As dawn slowly approached beyond the horizon, Hyunjin glanced at Felix one last time. The fear that had been visible earlier was gone. In its place stood something stronger, trust. And for reasons he couldn't fully explain, that realization left Hyunjin completely speechless, not because he lacked words, but because some promises are so sincere that words simply aren't enough. The next morning arrived quietly. Sunlight spilled through the dormitory windows, painting soft golden patterns across the floor. The storm from the previous night felt like a distant memory, yet Hyunjin could not stop thinking about it, or rather, he could not stop thinking about Felix, the promise, the confession, the look in Felix's eyes when he finally spoke honestly. Hyunjin sat alone near the window, staring at the city outside. Cars moved below like tiny shadows. People hurried through their routines. Everything looked normal, yet something inside him felt different. He hated admitting it. Because change always made him uncomfortable, especially emotional change. Hyunjin had spent most of his life hiding vulnerable parts of himself. It was easier that way, safer. People couldn't hurt what they couldn't see, but Felix had never followed those rules. Felix somehow walked directly into people's hearts without trying, without force, without manipulation, simply by being himself. And that made him dangerous. Not dangerous in the way villains were dangerous. Dangerous because he made people care. Because he made walls disappear. Because he made honesty feel unavoidable. A knock interrupted his thoughts. Hyunjin turned. Felix stood in the doorway, holding 2 cups of coffee. For a second neither spoke. Then Felix lifted 1 cup. Peace offering? Hyunjin raised an eyebrow. What? Felix smiled. Emotionally attacking you yesterday. A laugh escaped Hyunjin before he could stop it. At least you're aware of your crimes. Felix entered the room. The familiar ease between them remained. But there was something new now. Something quieter, more fragile. Like both of them were carefully learning how to exist after revealing parts of themselves that had remained hidden for years. Felix handed him the coffee. Their fingers brushed briefly, neither reacted, yet neither completely ignored it either. They sat near the window, watching the city wake up. For several minutes they simply enjoyed the silence. It wasn't awkward. It never had been. Somehow silence around Felix always felt different, comfortable. Like breathing, eventually Felix spoke. Did I make things weird? Hyunjin looked at him. What? Yesterday. Felix stared down at his coffee. The confidence from the rooftop seemed gone. Suddenly he looked nervous again. I kept thinking about it all night. Hyunjin blinked. You were worried? Felix laughed awkwardly. A little. Little? Okay, a lot. That surprised Hyunjin. Felix usually hid his worries well, yet now every emotion seemed visible, every doubt, every fear, every insecurity. It felt strangely reassuring, because it reminded Hyunjin that Felix wasn't as fearless as everyone believed. He was simply brave enough to keep moving despite being afraid. There was a difference, a very important difference. No, Hyunjin finally answered. Felix looked up immediately. No, relief flashed across Felix's face. You don't think things are weird? Hyunjin shook his head, nodded. It explains a lot. A small smile appeared. What does that mean? Hyunjin leaned back, thinking, choosing his words carefully. It explains why you always check on people. Felix listened quietly. It explains why you're always worried when someone seems distant. Another pause. It explains why you keep pretending you're okay even when you're not. Felix looked away, caught. Hyunjin continued. And it explains why you looked terrified yesterday. The last sentence landed gently, not as criticism, not as judgment, just truth. Felix laughed softly. I really was terrified. I noticed. It that obvious? Painfully obvious. Felix groaned dramatically. Hyunjin smiled. For a moment everything felt lighter. But beneath that comfort something else remained, a question, one Hyunjin hadn't answered yet, because Felix had shared his fear, but Hyunjin had never shared his own. The realization sat heavily in his chest. Felix had trusted him completely, yet Hyunjin had responded with only half of the truth, and somehow that felt unfair. Outside, a distant siren echoed through the city. Felix stared out the window, lost in thought. Hyunjin studied him quietly, the freckles, the tired eyes, the faint scar near his eyebrow, small details most people overlooked, details that became impossible to ignore once someone mattered. A strange ache settled inside him, not painful, not pleasant, just unfamiliar. Felix turned. Yeah, Hyunjin hesitated. For once the words felt difficult. His heart beat faster. Why was this so hard? He wasn't afraid of performing in front of thousands of people, wasn't afraid of criticism, wasn't afraid of failure. Yet speaking honestly felt terrifying, maybe because honesty left no place to hide, maybe because honesty demanded courage, the same courage Felix had shown the previous night. Hyunjin took a slow breath, then he spoke. There was something I never told you either. Felix blinked, immediately attentive. What is it? The room suddenly felt quieter. Hyunjin stared at the coffee in his hands, gathering strength, gathering honesty, years of carefully hidden emotions pressed against the walls he had built around himself. Walls that suddenly felt exhausted. Maybe Felix's promise had changed something after all. Maybe vulnerability was contagious. When Hyunjin finally looked up, his expression had softened. You said you're afraid of losing people. Felix nodded. Hyunjin smiled faintly. Afraid of being forgotten. Words surprised even him. Because he had never said them aloud before, not to anyone, not ever. Felix stared, silent. Hyunjin continued. When people look at me, they usually see confidence. A bitter laugh escaped him. But confidence is easy to fake. Truth flowed more easily now, like a door finally opening. Always worried that one day people will stop caring. Felix listened without interruption. Because they hate me, Hyunjin's voice became quieter. But because they'll move on. Confession hurt. Yet it also felt strangely relieving, like setting down something heavy after carrying it for years. I know it sounds stupid, doesn't? Answer came immediately, without hesitation, without judgment. Felix's eyes never left his. It doesn't sound stupid at all. For a moment, Hyunjin couldn't speak. Because Felix understood, completely, the way only someone who shared similar fears could understand. Neither of them feared being alone, not exactly. They feared becoming unimportant, invisible, forgotten. The realization connected pieces Hyunjin had never fully understood before. Perhaps that was why they always found their way back to each other. No matter how busy life became, no matter how chaotic schedules grew, no matter how much time passed, some connections naturally survived distance. Not because they were easy, because both people kept choosing them. Felix smiled gently. Then maybe we're both idiots. Hyunjin laughed. Probably. Felix extended his hand, a playful gesture, a childish one, yet somehow meaningful. A deal? Hyunjin looked at it. What kind of deal? Felix's smile widened. If you're afraid of being forgotten, he paused. And I'm afraid of losing people. The sunlight illuminated his face, warm, sincere, honest. Then let's keep reminding each other that neither of those things is happening. Hyunjin stared at him. The simplicity of the offer caught him off guard. No dramatic promises, no grand speeches, just something real, something human, something Felix. Slowly, Hyunjin reached forward, their hands met, a small gesture, yet somehow it felt significant, important, like the beginning of something neither fully understood yet. Outside, the clouds finally disappeared. The city shone beneath clear skies. And for the first time in a very long while, both of them felt a little less afraid of the future, because some fears become easier to carry when someone else understands them.
Days passed after that conversation, yet something had undeniably changed. Not in an obvious way. Neither Felix nor Hyunjin suddenly became different people. They still laughed over the same jokes, still argued over meaningless things, still teased each other whenever the opportunity appeared. To everyone around them, nothing seemed unusual. But beneath the surface, there was a new awareness between them, a quiet understanding, an invisible thread connecting every glance and every conversation. Appeared in small moments, the kind most people would never notice, like the afternoon Felix found Hyunjin alone in the practice room. Music echoed softly through the empty space. The mirrors reflected endless versions of Hyunjin as he repeated the same movement again and again. His breathing had become uneven, sweat dampened his shirt, yet he continued, again, perfection. It was a word Hyunjin chased relentlessly, a beautiful dream, a terrible burden. He knew the routine almost flawlessly already. Still, every tiny mistake felt enormous. Every imperfect movement echoed inside his mind long after everyone else had forgotten it. The music stopped. Hyunjin bent forward slightly, trying to catch his breath. Then he heard applause, slow, deliberate, annoyingly dramatic. He already knew who it was. Creepy, you know that? Felix grinned from the doorway. Prefer supportive. You've been standing there for how long? Felix pretended to think. Long enough to see you do the same move 57 times. Hyunjin groaned. Why are you counting? Because someone has to save you from yourself. Hyunjin rolled his eyes, yet a smile appeared despite his efforts. Felix walked into the room. His sneakers squeaked lightly against the polished floor. The practice room smelled faintly of wood, sweat, and old speakers, a familiar scent. A second home. Felix sat cross-legged on the floor, watching, waiting. Hyunjin knew that look, the look that said Felix had noticed something. And unfortunately, Felix was usually right. What? Felix tilted his head. Doing it again. Doing what? Being too hard on yourself. Hyunjin sighed, of course, that the conversation he always tried to avoid. Felix continued. Been practicing for hours, so you're exhausted. I'm fine. Felix laughed immediately, the kind of laugh that clearly meant he didn't believe a single word. Hyunjin narrowed his eyes. Why are you laughing? Because that's exactly what you always say. Answer irritated him, mostly because it was true. Felix stood up. Then he walked toward the mirrored wall. For a moment he stared at their reflections. Two people standing side by side, different, yet somehow similar. You know, Felix said quietly, when you're struggling, you disappear. Hyunjin frowned. What does that mean? Felix turned. His expression had become serious. It means you stop letting people help. The words landed harder than expected. Because Hyunjin knew they were true, whenever pressure increased, he withdrew. Whenever doubt appeared, he isolated himself. Whenever fear surfaced, he buried it. It was easier that way, or at least he had always believed so. Felix crossed his arms. You always think you have to carry everything alone. Hyunjin looked away. The mirrors suddenly felt uncomfortable, like they reflected more than appearances, like they reflected truths, and he wasn't sure he wanted to see them. Felix's voice softened. You don't have to. Silence followed, heavy, thoughtful. The late afternoon sunlight stretched across the floor. Dust floated through golden beams of light. For a moment neither moved. Then Hyunjin laughed quietly, not because something was funny, because he felt exposed. Since when did you become so wise? Felix smiled. Since I started worrying about you. Answer came naturally, without hesitation, without embarrassment, and somehow that made it more powerful. Hyunjin felt his chest tighten unexpectedly, because Felix wasn't trying to impress him, wasn't trying to sound profound. He was simply telling the truth, the simple truth that he cared. The realization lingered long after the conversation ended. That evening the group gathered for dinner. The atmosphere was lively, conversations overlapped. Laughter filled the room, plates clattered, someone complained dramatically about food, someone else started a ridiculous argument about movies. Everything felt warm, comfortable, normal. Yet Hyunjin found himself observing rather than participating, watching, listening, appreciating. Maybe Felix's words had changed something. Because suddenly he noticed details he usually overlooked. The way everyone instinctively waited for each other, the way laughter spread from one person to another, the way support appeared in countless tiny forms, a shared joke, a shoulder pat, a simple question asking if someone was okay. Small things, but important things, the kind of things people often take for granted until they're gone. Felix sat across from him. At some point their eyes met briefly. Neither said anything, neither needed to. A silent understanding passed between them, and Hyunjin looked away first, not because he was uncomfortable, because he suddenly realized something. For years he had been afraid of being forgotten. Yet he had never stopped to ask himself a different question. What if the people around him were afraid too? What if everyone carried invisible fears, invisible wounds, invisible doubts? The thought stayed with him long after dinner ended, long after everyone returned to their rooms, long after the building became quiet. At night sleep refused to come. Hyunjin lay awake staring at the ceiling. Moonlight spilled across the room, soft, silver, peaceful, yet his mind remained restless. Eventually he sat up. A strange feeling pulled him toward the window. Outside, the city glowed beneath the darkness. Countless lights, countless lives, countless stories unfolding simultaneously. Somewhere nearby, footsteps echoed faintly in the hallway. Then a gentle knock sounded at his door. Hyunjin blinked. Who would be awake at this hour? He stood and opened it. Felix, of course, holding 2 cans of soda again. "You know normal people sleep, right?" Hyunjin asked. Felix raised an eyebrow. "Awake too." "That's not the point." "Absolutely is." Despite himself, Hyunjin laughed. Felix entered the room. They sat near the window. The city stretched endlessly before them. For a while neither spoke. The silence felt familiar now, comfortable. Then Felix suddenly asked a question, a simple question, yet one that caught Hyunjin completely off guard. "When was the last time you were truly happy?" The room became still. Hyunjin froze. His mind searched immediately for an answer, a recent achievement, a successful performance, a memorable event, but none felt right. Because Felix hadn't asked when he felt proud, he had asked when he felt happy. There was a difference, a significant difference. Minutes seemed to pass. Neither rushed the moment, neither looked away. Finally, Hyunjin answered honestly. "I don't know." The words surprised him, because they were true. And hearing them aloud hurt more than expected. Felix remained quiet, not judging, not interrupting, just listening like he always did. Outside, the city lights flickered beneath the night sky. And for the first time, Hyunjin began wondering whether he had spent so long chasing success that he had forgotten how happiness felt. The thought lingered between them, quiet, unanswered, waiting. And neither of them realized that this conversation would become the beginning of a journey far more important than either of them had imagined. Hyunjin's answer lingered in the room long after he spoke it. "I don't know." The words echoed inside him, simple, honest, painfully honest. Felix didn't immediately respond. He sat beside the window, watching the city lights shimmer in the darkness. The soda can in his hands remained unopened. For once, even Felix seemed unsure what to say. The silence stretched between them, yet it wasn't uncomfortable. It felt necessary, like both of them were allowing the truth room to breathe. Outside, distant traffic hummed through the night. The city never truly slept, neither, it seemed, did their thoughts. Finally, Felix spoke. "I think that's sad." Hyunjin laughed quietly. "Thanks, I'm serious." "I know." Felix looked toward him. His eyes reflected the pale moonlight. "When people ask what makes you happy, you should have an answer." Hyunjin leaned back against the wall. "What about you?" Felix thought for a moment, then smiled. "A lot of things." As Felix's smile widened, fresh brownies. Hyunjin rolled his eyes immediately. "Of course. Sunny weather, predictable, music, reasonable, making people laugh." The teasing smile disappeared, only sincerity remained, and moments like this. Hyunjin blinked. "What?" Felix shrugged. "Just talking." Answer surprised him, not because it was dramatic, because it wasn't. Most people search for happiness in extraordinary moments. Achievement, success, recognition, big memories, but Felix found happiness in ordinary things. A conversation, a shared meal, a laugh, a quiet evening, things Hyunjin often overlooked, things he moved past without noticing. Suddenly he wondered how many happy moments he had accidentally ignored throughout the years. The thought stayed with him. The following weeks passed quickly. Schedules became busier. Practices grew longer. Interviews, performances, recordings. Life accelerated once again. Yet something had changed inside Hyunjin, slowly, subtly, almost imperceptibly. He began paying attention, not to success, not to mistakes, to moments. One afternoon he found himself laughing so hard at a ridiculous joke that tears formed in his eyes. Normally he would have forgotten it immediately. Instead, he remembered. Another day, he watched sunlight spill across the practice room floor, golden and warm, beautiful in a way he would previously have ignored. He remembered that too. Then there were moments involving Felix. Many of them, far more than he cared to admit. Like the time Felix nearly tripped while carrying snacks and somehow blamed gravity itself. Or when he became ridiculously excited over a song everyone else had heard hundreds of times. Or when he spent 30 minutes helping a nervous staff member feel comfortable. Small moments. Yet they remained in Hyunjin's mind, accumulating quietly, like stars appearing one by one in a night sky. One evening, several weeks later, the group finally received a rare day off. An actual day off, no schedules, no rehearsals, no obligation. The announcement felt almost suspicious. Too good to be true. Most of the members immediately began discussing plans. Some wanted to rest, others wanted to go out, the dormitory filled with excitement. Meanwhile, Hyunjin sat on the couch scrolling aimlessly through his phone, until Felix appeared, looking unusually determined, which was rarely a good sign. Get up. Hyunjin didn't even look up. No, Felix grabbed his wrist. Too late, Hyunjin frowned. What are you doing? We're leaving. Where? It's a surprise. I hate surprises. You don't. I absolutely do. Felix smiled. Survive. An hour later they found themselves far from the city center, far from cameras, far from expectations, far from noise. The ocean stretched endlessly before them, blue meeting blue, sky touching water at the horizon. The salty scent of the sea filled the air. Waves crashed rhythmically against the shore. A cool breeze danced through their hair. For several seconds Hyunjin simply stared, speechless, because he hadn't expected this. Felix looked oddly pleased with himself. See, Hyunjin continued staring at the ocean. When was the last time you came here? Felix asked quietly. Hyunjin searched his memory. The answer surprised him. Years, it had been years. Maybe longer. Life had become so busy that simple things disappeared, without him noticing. Without him realizing what he was losing. The two of them walked slowly along the beach. Footprints formed behind them in the wet sand, then vanished beneath incoming waves. The afternoon sun painted everything gold. For a while neither spoke. The ocean handled that responsibility. Its endless rhythm filled every silence. Eventually Felix stopped walking. Hyunjin stopped too. Several seagulls drifted overhead. The wind carried distant laughter from somewhere farther down the beach. Felix stared toward the horizon. Then he smiled. Remember my question? Hyunjin immediately knew which one. When was the last time you were truly happy? A question that had haunted him for weeks. Felix looked at him. What about now? The words caught him off guard. Hyunjin turned toward the ocean, the sunlight, the breeze, the waves, the absence of pressure, the simple presence of someone who understood him. And suddenly he realized something. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't thinking about tomorrow, wasn't worrying about expectations, wasn't criticizing himself. He was simply existing, simply breathing, simply living. A strange warmth spread through his chest, soft, gentle, real. Then, slowly, a smile appeared, a genuine one, not performed, not forced, just natural. Felix immediately noticed. His own smile grew wider. That's the answer, isn't it? Hyunjin laughed quietly. Maybe. Felix pointed dramatically. I told you. Me what? That normal people should know what happiness feels like. Hyunjin shook his head. Yet he couldn't stop smiling. And for once he didn't want to. The sun began sinking lower. Orange light stretched across the water. The entire world seemed painted in gold and amber, beautiful, temporary, perfect. Hyunjin stood there beside Felix, watching the horizon, feeling something inside him settle, not completely, not forever, but enough. Enough to remind him that happiness wasn't always something waiting in the future. Sometimes it existed right here, in small moments, in shared silence, in trusted company, in promises kept. And as the sun disappeared beyond the ocean, Hyunjin realized that the promise Felix had made on that rainy rooftop was no longer just Felix's promise. Without saying it aloud, it had quietly become his too.